History of Guernsey. Around 6000 BC, rising sea created the English Channel and separated the Norman promontories that became the bailiwicks of Guernsey and Jersey from continental Europe. Neolithic farmers then settled on its coast and built the dolmens and menhirs found on the islands today. The island of Guernsey contains two sculpted menhirs of great archaeological interest, while the dolmen known as l'Hôtel du Dieu contains a dolmen deity known as le Gardien du Tombeau. The Roman occupation of Western Europe induced people to flee, including to the Channel Islands where a number of hoards have been found, including the Grouville hoard. It later brought trade in Roman settlements. A 3rd century Gallo-Roman shipwreck was found in St. Peter Port Harbor. Trade was by ship down the west coast of Europe, silver from England, Breton pottery, wine amphorae, as discovered in the King's Road excavation in St. Peter Port. The nunnery in Alderney was a 5th century Roman signal station fort. During their migration to Brittany, Britons occupied the Lanner Islands, the former name of the Channel Islands, including Sarnia or Lissa, Guernsey, and Anja, Jersey. It was formerly thought that the island's original name was Sarnia, but recent research indicates that this might have been the Latin name for Sark. Sarnia nonetheless remains the island's traditional designation. Traveling from the Kingdom of Gwent, Saint Samson, later the abbot of Dol in Brittany, is credited with the introduction of Christianity to Guernsey. A chapel, dedicated to Saint Magloire, stood in a vale. Saint Magloire was a nephew of Saint Samson of Dol, and was born about the year 535. The chapel in his name was mentioned in a bull of Pope Adrian IV as being in the patronage of Montana Saint Michel, in Normandy. All traces of the chapel have gone. While the chapel would probably be of a much later date, Saint Magloire, the British missionary, may well have set up a center of Christian worship before AD 600. Somewhere around AD 968, monks, from the Benedictine monastery of Montana Saint Michel, came to Guernsey to establish a community in the north of the island. The Priory of Montana Saint Michel was a dependency of the famous Abbey of Montana Saint Michel. The history of the bailiwick of Guernsey goes back to 933 when the islands came under the control of William Longsword, son of Rollo I, Duke of Normandy, having been annexed from the Duchy of Brittany by the Duchy of Normandy. The island of Guernsey and the other island and the Channel Islands represent the last remnants of the medieval Duchy of Normandy. In the islands, Elizabeth II's traditional title as head of state is Duke of Normandy. The masculine nomenclature Duke is retained even when the monarch is female. According to tradition, Robert I, Duke of Normandy, the father of William the Conqueror, was journeying to England in 1032, to help Edward the Confessor. He was obliged to take shelter in Guernsey and gave land, now known as the Clos du Vale, to the monks. Furthermore, in 1061, when pirates attacked and pillaged the island, a complaint was made to Duke William. He sent over Samson d'Anneville, who succeeded, with the aid of the monks, in driving the pirates out. For this service, Samson d'Anneville and the monks were rewarded with a grant of half the island between them. The portion going to the monastery being known as La Fief Saint Michel, and included the parishes of Saint Saviour, Saint Pierre du Bois, Sainte Marie du Catel, and the Vale. The loss of Normandy by King John in 1204 isolated the Channel Islands from mainland Europe. Each time England and France went to war over the coming centuries, trade to and from the Channel Islands was restricted or banned, and even when not officially at war, the island was repeatedly attacked by continental pirates and naval forces. Fortifications were improved in the Channel Islands, manned by professional soldiers and the Guernsey militia who would help to defend the island for the next 600 years. Service was compulsory in the militia for every man in the island. At the start of the 100 Years' War, Sark was captured, and using this as a base, the next year when, starting in 1339, Guernsey was occupied by the Capetians, holding the island for 2 years and Castle Cornet for 7. The attacks would recur on several occasions. It was 1348 when the Black Death reached the island, ravaging the population. In 1372, the island was invaded by Aragonese mercenaries under the command of Owain Logic, remembered as Yvon de Gales, who was in the pay of the French king. Logic and his dark-haired mercenaries were later absorbed into Guernsey legend as an invasion by fairies from across the sea. Shipbuilding skills improved and trade to and from Guernsey increased with a growing number of ports, sometimes using trading treaties and sometimes avoiding paying duties. Guernsey ships in the 14th century were small, 1280 tons with crews of 20 men. In times of war, ships could be seized as prizes, the practice continuing in times of peace, against all nationalities, as piracy. In the mid-16th century, the island was influenced by Calvinist reformers from Normandy. During the Marian persecutions, 3 local women, the Guernsey martyrs, were burned at the stake in 1556 for their Protestant beliefs. 2 years later Elizabeth I came to the throne and Catholicism faded in Guernsey. The French and piracy were problems to trade with Guernsey in the 16th century, requiring English naval ships to keep them at bay. Guernsey and Jersey were given certain privileges as the English crown needed the islands to be loyal, not least of which was the islands' neutrality, allowing trade to be pursued with France and England, even when these were at war. The trade creating revenue from taxes to pay for the island garrisons. During the English Civil War, Guernsey sided with the parliamentarians, while Jersey remained royalist. Guernsey's decision was mainly related to the higher proportion of Calvinists and other Reformed churches, as well as Charles I's refusal to take up the case of some Guernsey seamen who had been captured by the Barbary corsairs. The allegiance was not total, however. There were a few royalist uprisings in the southwest of the island, while Castle Cornet was occupied by the governor, Sir Peter Osborne, and royalist troops. Castle Cornet, which had been built to protect Guernsey, was turned on by the town of St. Peter Port, who constantly bombarded it. It was the penultimate royalist stronghold to capitulate, in 1651.